So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the player. Now to set up the player, we're just going to make a basic stand-in for the player and have his gun. I'll also explain how this window works. So to create the player, we're going to come up into our game objects and go capsule. Now on every object there's components. Now components it's everything. It's like if you click on the light, you'll see it has a light component, and the camera has a camera component and GUI components and things. Now everything has a transform component. A transform component is like a reference to where it is, how big it is, what its rotation is, and that can't be removed. Every object has one by default, and it can't be removed. So if we click on our capsule, we'll see our transform, our position. I'm just going to zero it out and make the Y 1.5 so that it's sitting on our box. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at these components. Now the components we have are mesh render, capsule collider, and capsule mesh. Now the capsule mesh is like obviously the model. It's the shape that you've created in another program. And the collider is what collides with things. It's this green capsule around the capsule. Now this is for physics and picking up on collisions and rigid body, all that good stuff. So we'll talk a bit more about rigid bodies in a second. And we've also got the mesh render, which is pretty much a materials thing, and whether or not it's rendering and whether or not it has shadows. So you can turn the mesh render off and it makes it invisible. Okay, so to start off, we're going to remove the capsule collider, because we don't want a capsule collider, we want something a little simpler. So we want physics, we're going to go component, physics, box collider. Now the box collider is pretty much the same thing, but it's a box. And so when you import a model, if you're not using a default shape already made in Unity, which I suggest you don't once you actually make your finished game, but for now it's fine, you'll have to put in the size and center values. Now the size, obviously, remembering X, Y, and Z, how big the box is. So if the box is 10 wide, it's not really what we want. So Unity has already done it for us, and also the center, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much where the center of the box collider is, so I can move it up if I want it to be slightly different to what it thinks I want. Excuse me. So that's it for there. We're not going to add a material or make it a trigger. So we're just going to go component, physics, rigid body. Now rigid body basically adds gravity, makes it act realistic, all that good stuff. So we've got mass, drag, angular drag, gravity, is kinematic, interpolate, and freeze rotation, and collision detection. We're going to leave collision detection as discrete. Collision detection is discrete. Freeze rotation is on, so it's not flipping around like crazy. Leave kinematic off. We'll use gravity, and we'll leave everything else at default. Mass and drag and all that stuff, that's like physics and like how it reacts to everything else, what it weighs and all that stuff. We don't really need to worry about that. So if we move this up, hit play, you'll see it falls down onto the platform, which is exactly what we want. So now we need to work out how the gun's going to work for the player. I'll put that back to 1.5. Okay, now we're going to add an empty game object. Now, pretty much an empty game object is just nothing. It's just empty. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's just like a point. It has just the transform. It doesn't have a collider or a mesh render. It has nothing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly rename the capsule player and quickly rename the game object gun. And so what we're going to do with the gun is we're going to drag it. Well, first of all, I moved it from the center out to the side, so it's on the side of the capsule. And we're going to take the gun and drag it onto the player. So what this has done is it's moved the gun so it's the child of the player. Now what a child is pretty much it follows it around. So the player is the parent of the gun, and the gun is the child of the player. So if I move the gun, it's normal. But if I move the player and then look at the gun has followed. So this is very useful for making guns and that sort of thing. So that's the gun. That's like the point where the gun is in the player's hand. But we don't actually have a gun yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a cube and we'll scale it down on uniformly and then scale it up on the X a bit. Move it out to the side. Closer to where the actual gun game object is, the better. So about there. Now, this is going to be called gun model. This is a stand-in for the model that's going to be totally awesome that you're going to make later for your totally awesome $1 million game. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the box collider, and we're not going to add another one because we just don't want that to collide with anything. And I made that the child of the gun. So pretty much it's like a tree working its way down. See, I moved the player, they all move. I moved the gun and the gun model move. If I move the gun model, it only moves on its own because it's the child of everything. So it's like a branch of a tree, which is pretty straightforward. So at the moment, I've got the player set up, and that's all we want for now. So in the next one, we're going to talk a bit about this window and setting up your first script.